Hi, welcome back to the GemHawks YouTube channel. Thank you so much for continuing to hang out with me, and I hope that some of the demonstrations and tutorials that I'm bringing for you are useful. Now, a couple of weeks ago I showed you how to do the cheat prong setting, which is a little bit like this one. And what I want to do today is show you a variation on a theme. Now, you can create this prong setting in a way where you have a prong in front and a prong behind. And I'm going to show you how to achieve that today. And what it means is you don't have the zigzaggy pattern on the back holding everything together. It's a single long piece of wire which is then woven together at the top. So I'm going to be using 1mm gauge raw copper wire, an oversized agate cabochon that's been dyed a lovely shade of blue, and a small amount of 0.4mm gauge wire just to hold things together at the top. My tools today are some flat facing pliers, my handy ones that are the same distance all the way along. Now, there are two ways that you can create this same piece, and you've really got to find out which is the easiest way for you. I am going to show you both techniques to create those two-sided prongs or alternating prongs, and then we can move forward to setting the cabochon. So if we pop down to the board, this is the piece I'm going to be working with. Very inexpensive to get hold of cabochons in an agate, especially colourful ones like this. They are quite plentiful. And what we're going to be working with, as I say, is a length of the 1mm gauge wire. So I'm just going to give that a little bit of warmth, and I'm going to show you two techniques as to how you can create that alternating prong. Now I'm going to leave a good several inches, maybe 4 or 5 inches at one end, which we will use to create a bail later on. And what I'm going to do is begin by putting a right angle in my wire. I'm going to use the depth of my pliers to generate the length of the prong. Just going to support that prong and make sure that I'm getting a nice flat line. Turn that slightly, and then you can either use pliers or your fingers just to bring that prong into position. Support it at the baseline and then gently squeeze that together until you have your first prong. Now, if you're careful, you can support the prong like so and draw the wire along. So we've got a little bit of a baseline here. You might just want to flatten that down as you go. Now, our first prong is going to be in the flat plane, so it is the same kind of orientation as the table that we're working. And the next prong we're going to create needs to come up at around about a 40 to 45 degree angle. So if you take the base wire a little bit further down those pliers than you would normally do. If I hold it up in this direction, you'll be able to see. So I've got the prong coming out at 90 degrees here. I'm going to now take the next prong away at an angle, like so. And bring that back down, and you'll be able to see that, hopefully. And then I'm going to support the new prong that we're creating, measure the distance to the end of the prong, and then draw that back around, back to the baseline, where we're going to do the exact same careful squeezing motion so that we get that second prong nice and flat. And again, if you're careful, you can hold that prong in position and continue along the baseline. So what you're looking to achieve is one prong flat and one coming up just beneath the 45 degree mark. Now, if you find this particularly tricky, I'm just going to move along, pretend we're starting anew. Sorry, let me continue a little bit further along. You would, on your third prong, I do apologise, come back onto that straight, flat out line and generate one prong on the flat and then one at an angle. So if I just do two of each, sorry about that. Give that a nice bit of a squeeze, make it nice and flat down, like so. Gently hold on to that to generate the flat line. Get your next prong in position, but bring it up at that angle, like so. And then use your pliers again or your measurement to generate the next prong length. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. You will, of course, take a little bit more time than I am just to get these prongs nice and even and to keep the baseline nice and flat. So I'm just going to take a second to give that a bit of a squeeze here, and then generate the continuance. So we've got one prong going out flat to the table and then one coming up away. So you can see there's a gap between them of around about, let's say, 35 to 40 degrees. And you continue until you have enough baseline to go around the outside of your chosen cabochon. I'm just going to trim this away now. So that is your first technique for creating the alternating prongs. So we have one coming away at the flat angle, and then one coming up from that like so. And you're going to do one flat, one raised, one flat, one raised, all the way along the baseline until you have enough prongs to cover the entire circuit of your chosen cabochon. The second way that you can do this, and if you find that first technique a bit tricky, this might be the one for you. So if we pop that down to the board now, I'm just going to warm through my length of wire. Obviously you would have a piece much longer than this if you were going to use an oversized cabochon like mine. But what I'm doing is just showing you the two different techniques for now. So exactly as we did in the cheats prong setting, you can quite quickly build up a series of prongs all on the same orientation, exactly as we did in the cheats prong setting. So I'm very quickly going to make 4 prongs, push that back down. You would take your time and make sure that your prongs are all the same length. Now if you struggle to hold the prong whilst you generate that baseline, there is an alternative way to do that. So if I just generate the next prong here, right angle, bend the tip over, push that back around, squeeze that until you get the prong. Now instead of holding onto the prong and pulling this direction to generate the flat line, you can hold on to the tail of the wire and twist it. So it really is all about what works best for you. So we're trying to keep that baseline nice and flat. I'm going to do one more prong with this technique. These are all in exactly the same orientation, all at 45 degrees to that base wire. Bend that around, support the base, gently squeeze those prongs until they sit into position. What you need to do if you're going to use this technique is not apply too much pressure, otherwise your prong will squish over on itself. If you hold that nice and gently, you can bend this away. And if you need to, you can just edit that slightly so that it sits nice and flat and you've got a really lovely flattened out baseline. Now if this is the technique that you wanted to use because you find it easier than alternating as you're going along, I'll show you now how you can change this to the next segment that we will need. So popping back down, we've got 4 on a straight line. All we would need to do is bring one of those prongs up, bring the next prong up, support this one, our third one, turn the fourth one down. So you end up with the exact same effort, the exact same end product rather, but with a slightly different effort. So it's entirely up to you as to which way you want that to work. This one actually looks quite neat, so we're going to use this one for the next stage of the demonstration. So we've got our 2 different sets of prongs. We've got ones that are flat to the table and we've got ones which are coming up at an angle. The ones that are coming up at an angle, what we're going to do is we're going to apply a bend to them inwards towards the flat prongs, and I'll show you exactly what I mean, so that it creates a hug for our gemstone. So if we imagine that we have got enough wire coming around to fit our gemstone, what we're going to do is exactly the same as we did with the cheats prong. Our prongs which are angled, we're going to support around about halfway up with those flat pliers, and we're going to turn the tips over on each of the angled prongs. So again, I'm supporting that around about halfway and then turning the tip over slightly. Now what tends to happen is that your baseline comes out of shape, so you might just need to give that a little bit of an education to get it to sit. At this point, what we're going to do is assess how deep the cabochon is as to whether or not we need to move those bent prongs ever so slightly to fit the cabochon properly. So if we pop back down, I have a length of, where is it? Here we go. Got a length of wire ready with prongs coming up and some that are flat to the table or flat-ish. What I haven't done is just turned the tips over, so I will do that now. So again, just gripping the prong and turning the tips over. Grip about halfway along and then take the very end. Really handy to have some bent chain nose pliers if you can get hold of them. You can of course do this with any flat pliers at all. Do try and grip quite firmly at this point so that you can maintain that baseline, what we're looking to do is to keep this as close together as possible, this side and this side. If you are a little bit heavy-handed at this point, you can not only make the baseline move out of position, but you can also open up the prongs slightly, which could weaken your design. So we again have a series of prongs which are flat to the table and prongs which are now elevated and curved. So we're going to start by looking at the design. This is quite a thick cabochon, it's quite a feisty one as well. So what we might need to do is just draw those prongs up ever so slightly to make sure that we can get them around our cab. So just moving little by little until we can tell that this is going to sit nicely. So we want those prongs to stay flat to the table, and then we're just going to be lifting up the prongs that we have actually bent already to sit over the face of the cabochon, like so and like so. So we're just going to pop that down and see if it sits inside nicely, which it does, and then we're going to start to need to curve this around. Now you can, if you want to, try and do that as you're building this section of framework. I actually find it easier to build all the prongs, put the curves in first, and then take the baseline to fit around the edges of your cabochon. That's how I prefer to work, but you obviously, as you go through this technique, you will find what works best for you. And you know, if it's easier one way, or if it makes you happier, or if it gives you greater control over the evenness of the prongs and where the bends are, then you know, you do best. So let's go back down to the board. And we'll start by finding the centre point. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is our centre point. So we're going to aim to put the cabochon sitting like so, if we're setting it in the portrait orientation. It's got lovely fingerprints on, sorry about that. So I'm just going to start by putting a bit of a curvature in the base wire to get that to fit around the bottom of the cabochon. Like so. That's a little bit tight, so you can always open that out again if you need to. It is a case of every cabochon will be slightly different. Obviously you can get cabs that are completely set to a specific dimension, and then you'll get used to doing that. So I can see we need to put a little bit of curvature in the next segment, but probably not a huge amount. So I'm just going to draw that around on one side and then draw that around on the other side. I find it easier to do this little by little rather than doing too much and then discovering that actually it's not going to work for me. So you can see that the cab is quite fat for these prongs, so we're going to need to just push that in. It's another reason I love working with an agate, because it's quite hard and you can be just a little bit brutal with it while you're learning. So you can see that actually this is going to fit quite nicely. What I want to do is make sure that I'm happy with where those prongs sit on the face of the gem. With a gem like this, which is it's asymmetric, you can worry slightly less, but if you have a completely blank cabochon or a carved cabochon, sometimes you can see if the prong is slightly offset, and that might upset you later. So I'm just going to draw the top around like so, and I'm just using the edge of the cabochon to pull those wires into position until they sit neatly. So I don't need to worry about getting the base wire behind the cabochon. That's for another day. That's a different technique altogether. This is a really simple way of just using one strand of heavy gauge wire, 1mm in this instance, to get you setting your cabochon really very quickly. So I'm going to flick this over and show you what the back will look like, and you can see that there are plenty of prongs sitting flush to the flat back of the cabochon, which will stop it from falling backwards. So I'm just going to pinch this quite firmly and estimate where I want the uprights to turn away from the cabochon and form the neck of, in this instance, pendant. So I'm just going to twist them like so and like so, and try to get a bit of a firm bend on them. And that is the basics of the piece. All you would need to do now at the neck end, and I'll just show you very, very quickly the start of the process, is just put a figure of 8 weave or any weave that you want to in some 0.4mm gauge, and that's really all it takes to make this come together. And just using one strand of heavy gauge wire, quite often when I'm making big pendants, especially ones which are by commission, there can be 6, 7, 8, 10 strands of wire all going on at once. And what I wanted to do was to show you a super simple way and a safe way to encapsulate a cabochon just using one heavy strand. So I'm just going to grab a short length of 0.4mm gauge wire. I'm going to leave it on the reel, and I'm just going to start off back down onto the board now. I'm just going to take that tail and wrap it 3 times around one of those shoulders. Push the wire, it's going down the centre, so underneath on the other side, can bring those tails out, and then draw that all the way around. Now I'm not going to do a lot of weaving, it's a very simple figure of 8. I've gone 3 times around one side, 3 times around the other side, always alternating, so down the centre, underneath and around, 1 and 2 and 3, down the centre, up this side now and around, 1 and 2 and 3. So if I slide this piece of weaving now down into position, and you may need to, if you've done lots of weave, you may need to grab hold of the wire with your pliers just to help that along. You'll see that you've actually created a really safe piece of jewellery. Now this is obviously a little bit misshapen because I've been hurrying through to show you the technique, but you can take time to get that nice and fitted to the outside of your gemstone. On the back, there's no way that that gem's going to go through on the back. So I will take a photograph and add it on in just a second when that's complete. That is your alternating prong setting using one strand of 1mm gauge wire and a short length of 0.4. I hope you found this helpful. Do please feel free to pass on any requests for future demonstrations and tutorials. I do endeavour to bring you content which you find interesting and helpful, so just give me a shout. Many thanks for your time. Do hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now.